But she was having rows, wasn't she, with Spain, who were Catholic and who were attacking her from the Pope. And of course we all know, don't we, that Francis Drake went to see, he wasn't in charge by the way, everybody thinks he was, but he wasn't. Lord Howard of Effingham was in charge, he was the Lord High Admiral. And Francis Drake was simply a rear admiral, at that battle, died as a vice admiral in fact in the West Indies. But, so they beat the Spanish fleet with a little help from the Almighty, because I don't care what anybody says, God is an Englishman. And he's going to help us, believe me, he will. So basically, Elizabeth managed to protect her kingdom both from internal interference from abroad and from direct invasion from abroad. But she made one mistake. She never got married and had a son or a daughter. So when she died, she left the crown of England to James, I think it was James IV of Scotland, James I of England. Now he had a drawback in the fact that he was a Stuart, he was a Scotsman. And most of our problems are Scots oriented. Tony Blair's a Scotsman, Gordon Brown's a Scotsman. Look at the damage that pair of buggers have done. Yeah?
Isn't the Queen Stuart?
What?
Isn't the Queen by descent?
The Queen can trace her ancestry back to Ethelred the Unready, which is Saxon. But because royals actually intermarry across borders and everything else, it's very, very difficult to say that any particular member of a royal family is a Stuart or a Hanoverian or Plantagenet or somebody else. Very difficult because you need to sit there with charts on genealogy for weeks and weeks and weeks, following it all the way down to trace where it goes to. I know an earl, a baron. He's a real live baron. He's been thrown out of the House of Lords. He's not very happy. His name is Lord Sudeley. And Lord Sudeley has in his house a box. It's about this long, it's about this thick, by about this, and it contains the genealogy of his family, which goes back to Anglo-Saxon times. Because I said to him one day, what I'd like to do is get ourselves a nice Anglo-Saxon king, but I'm without a trace an Anglo-Saxon baron, and he said, well, I'm one. So I said, you've got the job. So basically, Elizabeth managed to protect the country. But when the Stuarts came, James was all right because he had to be a bit on best behaviour. But when Charles I came, the Stuarts had one failing. They all thought they ruled by divine right and were not subject to the law. But all of our kings are subject to the law. And we know this because the Chief Justice to Henry II, a man called Henry de Bracton, he ruled that the king is beneath no man, but he is beneath God, and he rules England as God's lieutenant and according to God's laws. And he is beneath the law, for it is by the law that he becomes king. So Queen Elizabeth is not above the law. Anyway, Charles Stuart got out of his pram and was doing things because he thought he ruled by divine right, could do what he liked. And they sent him the Petition of Right in 1628, which was basically a demand that we be ruled by our own law, which we now know is Alfred's law. Well, he didn't take any notice, a great deal of notice of that. So in 1641 they sent him the Grand Remonstrance, which again was saying, you've got to rule us according to our laws. And he still didn't take any notice. I think it was in 1649 we chopped his head off. Oliver Cromwell was offered the throne. Everybody went up to Oliver Cromwell and said, we want you to be king. And he turned it down. He turned it down. He was Lord Protector, but he would not be king. And that gave people a problem. And the reason they wanted Oliver Cromwell to be king was that in this country, if you are actually the king, whether you have a right to it or not, if you are actually the king, you are the king. And nobody who works for the real king, the one who's entitled to be king by inheritance, is in fact able to be tried for treason by the king for defending the other king. Yeah? It's a system we've developed. It's peculiar to England because it means you can argue your case, and if you lose, then, you know, everything is forgiven. Go away, have a pint, and we'll all be great mates again, and we'll carry on as before. So basically it's a lovely system. It's a good country, it's a good state of mind to be English, really. And so basically this is what happened. And he died when he lost his head. Oliver Cromwell died. His son was a plonker of the first ilk, so he didn't keep the job very long. And they invited Charles II back. Well, now when Charles II came, he'd learnt a little bit of the lesson that you know, if you mess these boys about, you lose your head. So he behaved himself. But when he died, James II came to the throne. Now James II must have been particularly stupid, because he was doing things which were highly illegal. He was appointing Roman Catholics to positions in the armed forces and in government, which was banned by law. And so what he was doing was he was doing this, and there was this guy there, and he got his servant to actually go and complain that my boss has now been made a captain in the army. I think it's called Hale's case. My boss has now been made a captain in the army, and he's a Roman Catholic, and he shouldn't be because the law says he can't be. So they put him on trial, and his defence was, I have a dispensation from the king to do this job. But of course, kings could at that time give a dispensation for a penalty for an offence. Queen Elizabeth, for example, when the Earl of Essex, whom she was very fond of, lost his temper one day and went to grab his sword and strike her with his sword, which is an act of treason, high treason in fact, she forgave him, because all the courtiers jumped on him and chucked him out the door, but she forgave him because that was a personal treason against her. But when the Earl of Essex tried to start a riot in order that he could take the country by force, she took his head off. And there was a Chief Justice Vaughan of the Common Pleas who was outlining the dispensing power of the king in 1674. And what he said was that the king cannot dispense with a penalty for a common law offence. So any common law offence he can't do away with. What common law offences? Well, if you look at the Bible, the Ten Commandments, thou shalt not, anything that's in there that you can is a common law offence, basically. And common law is a combination of two things. It is the will of the people, and the way they've grown up is the will of the people, and it's the result of court cases explaining the law the way it should be, with very good medieval judges have given us very, very good law. And Chief Justice Vaughan said that he cannot give a dispensation against a common law offence, but he can give a dispensation against a statute offence. But he cannot give a dispensation against all statute offences. The only time he can give a dispensation is if the actual offence is directly against him and nobody else. If a third party is involved, then the king can't give a dispensation for the penalty for that, because that person would have a duty to sue in law for damages.